Hi everyone. Today we're continuing into the art world of the 20th century, moving from Post-Impressionism into Dadaism and Surrealism. Before we get there, just a kind of a quick review of Post-Impressionist works. We saw in the previous lecture that the Post-Impressionists are kind of moved by different things. So whether it's color, the use of shapes, or how shapes are used to display figures and areas, the post-impressionists do that differently than ever before. We're seeing a further and further break from quote unquote reality in terms of how things are replicated or depicted, trying to see exactly what happens in the actual world. We're not going to see that as much as we move forward here into the next couple of movements. We also see a reluctance, or I shouldn't say reluctance, a less use of three-dimensional techniques, trying to create three dimensions instead, kind of an acknowledgement that you're working in two dimensions, and the shapes and ideas are going to be depicted as such. Finally, we see in post-impressionist thought more focused on a particular thing than trying to paint an entire scene of some sort. It's just really kind of one thing, one subject that the painters are going to be looking at. We're getting much, much more abstract in terms of how things are represented, as I mentioned. So just kind of another one. This is considered post-impressionist. This is composition with red, blue, and yellow, via Mondrian. You can see that there is no true subject to this. There's not a person. It's not a landscape of any kind. It's simply using geometric patterns. And actually, it's tough to see here, but as you get closer to it, you can tell that it's not just a straight line, that there's texture to it. There's layers and differences within brushstrokes as these shapes and geometric patterns are being made. But again, that highlights the lack of a focus on a specific person with these post-impressionists. Here's kind of an example from the architecture world. Frank Lloyd Wright is breaking from the kind of traditional Bauhaus techniques to create this cantilevered work. This is down outside of Uniontown, if you've ever been down in that area. It's a really cool place to visit. I'd strongly recommend it. This dude was a rock star of the architecture world, and this is built for Kaufmann's, the famous family of the department store name, to be like a kind of a retreat home. If you get the chance, really check it out. But he makes use of what is there for him. It's less about the form of the house itself that has these incredible cantilevered structures. It's much more about how the house is melded with the environment. And so it gives it that kind of abstract quality. You can still see the use of kind of the geometric shapes and patterns that Picasso got into with the Cubist movement. And so this is a great example of seeing that break from the architecture of the time, which is going to be much more functionally driven. This is kind of a new take on that. Dadaism is the first of the two movements today. This is post-World War I, and so the world has gone through the Great War, the war to end all wars, which doesn't end all wars. It's kind of irrational, as we'll see a couple of examples here. There's a rationality to it, but it's not what we would think of as being traditionally rational. There's some speculation, is it hopeless art or is it hopeful art? Is it pessimistic or optimistic moving forward? But you'll see, I think, in the kind of confusion of Dadaism sometimes, the elements of how people are feeling after World War I, how people are left feeling, those who come home injured after World War I, the harsh realities of their new lives. So the first one we have here is kind of straddling, again, this idea of the post-impressionists and the Dada movement. We have Nude Descending a Staircase, number 2 by Marcel Duchamp. You can see moving from left to right here, upper left down to the right. You can see elements of stairs here. You can see elements of a person who is making the way down the staircase. But we see heavy, I mean, looks functionally cubist in nature if you look at this compared to some of the things that Picasso is doing at the same time. And so we really see that influence. You can see, again, more stairs in the background here, but you can see as this quote-unquote person is moving down the staircase, it is not a traditional form. It is not a traditional subject that is often painted. And so we see something, Marcel Duchamp is doing something different than has ever been done before. And that's going to be completely evident in the next piece, which is an installation piece called The Fountain. So go ahead and view the video clip that comes up after this from Khan Academy, and then you can move on from there. Maybe. Okay. Another example of the Dada movement. This was in your textbook. Cut with the kitchen knife Dada through the last Weimar beer belly. This is Hannah Hough, 1919, 1920. The various elements here, it looks haphazard, but you have a form to this. Lots of commentary on the Dada movement, people being anti-Dada and saying that it's not really art. You have some famous figures of Germany here who, excuse me, are responsible for kind of the conditions during and after World War I. There's a good video by Khan Academy on this as well that goes into a little bit more of what each of the subject areas are. Things like down here in this lower quadrant, talking about famous figures of the Dada movement. We can see this dancer with the two heads. We see actually some of her contemporaries, and a portrait of herself is kind of hidden in here. So if you get the chance, I think it's worthwhile. But it really kind of shows that complete abstractness to the Dada movement, kind of a complete rebelling against anything resembling any sort of form that comes from the Dada movement too. The next movement that we're looking at here is Surrealism. This is based on the ideas of trying to look at the irrational, things like dreams and dreamscapes. These are things that cannot really be explained. When you wake up after having a dream and you can only remember snippets of it, or things don't really seem to relate, where you're walking down the stairs and all of a sudden the stairs turn to yellow and you bounce your way down, and then you end up with a broken arm and it gets fixed by a magic wizard with a leprechaun on his shoulder, whatever it may be. Things seemingly don't click together in a dream. And so Surrealism kind of takes a look at some of those elements. This is in part touching upon the work of Sigmund Freud. We got into Freud a little bit, his work and discussion with the unconscious. We're moving out of rational science. So the Darwinism movement of the late 1800s, where everything should be able to be seen, be observed, and then use that to create your fact. We're dealing much more with scientific theories that are then going to try to be proven. Freud talking about the id, the ego, and the superego. He deals a lot with repressed memories and things like that. A lot with, obviously, he's going to talk about the Oedipal complex with the mother and the Electra complex with the father. All of these things are going on in the subconscious. You can't really see them happening. And so the influence and impact of Freud on the surrealists is particularly closely connected. It's kind of a variation of Dada. So Dada is kind of, here's all this stuff out there floating around, and as you saw in the fountain, it doesn't really make sense in terms of traditional artwork. Whereas Surrealism kind of uses traditional artwork to look at these irrational and non-traditional themes. Here's an example of one from Rene Magritte. This is 1929. In French there it says, "This is not a pipe." And so there's kind of this give and take. What do you trust? Do you trust the pipe, the image of the pipe? Do you trust the words that are on there? Is it making commentary that it's not a pipe, it's simply an image of a pipe? Or is it trying to get you to really think, okay, which one is true? Which statement is true? Is it about the image itself, or is it about the idea that what we don't really know what truth is sometimes? And so it's really delving into some of those kind of unconscious thought processes. In the next one, everything looks normal, no big deal. Got a bottle of what appears to be wine, maybe meat or crepe on the table. Place is all set, but there's an eyeball in the middle. Look, there's an eye in the middle of the plate right here, and you can't miss it. But the idea with Surrealism is things don't always click in our minds, and so how do we represent that? How do we represent that? And is that truth because it's being represented and we don't really have a true understanding of our minds, or is it this irrational type of thinking? Next one of my favorites. This is kind of the traditional surrealist painting, The Persistence of Memory by Salvador Dali, 1931. You can see the famous clocks melting all over, melting what appears to be this human face, but is severely misshapen like a balloon that has been deflated. and you have the ants crawling over the timepiece that, as time just keeps marching on, that kind of thing. But there are some real shapes to this. These cliffs here, possibly being from Spain, actual kind of cliffside from a region in Spain. You have these tables that are depicted here, but then you have a tree growing out of this table. And so it's really, this is a great example of that surrealist dreamscape that I was mentioning earlier. This may or may not be true. My art history teacher in college talked about this being created, or at least the idea for it being created by Dali, while he was waiting to see the dentist, and it just seemed like time just as he's sitting there reading, 3-month-old magazines or whatever it is, time is just wasting away into nothingness. And so again, I don't know if that's actually true, but that was the Dr. Chiki Okeke, Penn State University art history teacher. The last video clip is going to take you through a little bit more of surrealism. If you have any questions, please always let me know. Once you have done viewing the video, though, I do want you to do a quick writing, no more than a paragraph. It's just graded on accuracy. How does the art of the late 19th and early 20th century mimic or is impacted by the events of Europe and the world during those time periods? So we're really looking and trying to consider the post-impressionist movement. If you want to use an impressionist work to help you, that's okay, but moving really from post-impressionism through Dadaism and into surrealism. Use at least 2 examples of artwork that we've hit and at least 1 event of Europe to help explain the connection, the impact, the mimicking of them. You're going to be turning that into me. Once you've done that, that's it. Have a great day. Thank you all for everything. And if you have any questions, as I mentioned, please let me know.